One, Adolf Hitler's unrelenting hatred for communism and his vision of German expansion led to one of the most ambitious and catastrophic military operations in history, Operation Barbarossa. Fueled by his belief in the ideological clash between Nazism and Bolshevism, Hitler viewed the Soviet Union not only as a political enemy, but as an existential threat to his dream of a German-dominated Europe. Beyond ideology, Hitler's obsession with Lebensraum, living space, was central to his plans. The vast resources of the Soviet Union, from fertile farmlands to oil-rich regions, represented a prize that would sustain the Third Reich for generations. Hitler believed that by conquering the East, Germany would achieve self-sufficiency and economic dominance, securing its position as a global superpower. On June 22, 1941, over 3 million German soldiers surged across the Soviet border in a meticulously planned blitzkrieg. Initially, the offensive appeared unstoppable, but the harsh Russian winter, fierce Soviet resistance, and logistical nightmares turned Hitler's grand vision into a devastating quagmire. Operation Barbarossa became a turning point in World War II, shattering Hitler's ambitions and altering the course of history. On June 22, 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military campaign in history, with over 4 million Axis troops invading the Soviet Union along a 1,800-mile front. Driven by ideological hatred of communism and a desire for the Soviet Union's vast resources, Hitler saw this as a critical step toward his dream of a German empire in the East. Initially, the operation was a stunning success. German forces employed blitzkrieg tactics to devastating effect, capturing vast swaths of Soviet territory, including Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev. By autumn, the Germans had advanced to the outskirts of Moscow, leaving destruction in their wake. The Soviet military was caught off guard, suffering enormous losses in men and equipment. However, the rapid advance overstretched German supply lines, and logistical challenges began to mount. The Soviets regrouped, employing scorched earth tactics and mounting fierce resistance. As winter set in, temperatures plummeted, freezing German equipment and soldiers unprepared for the harsh conditions. What began as a lightning assault devolved into a grueling struggle, marking the beginning of Germany's eventual defeat on the Eastern Front. Despite suffering catastrophic losses in the early stages of Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Union demonstrated remarkable resilience. The initial shock of the German invasion left the Red Army reeling, with cities like Kiev and Smolensk falling and millions of soldiers taken captive or killed. Yet, as the Germans advanced deeper into Soviet territory, the USSR began to mobilize its vast reserves of manpower, industry, and resources. One of the key figures in this recovery was General Georgy Zhukov, whose leadership and strategic brilliance turned the tide of the war. Recognizing the urgency of defending Moscow, Zhukov masterminded a series of counteroffensives that struck the German forces at their weakest points. These offensives, combined with Soviet tactics like scorched earth strategies and the relentless winter, sapped the Germans' morale and strength. By December 1941, the Soviet forces had successfully pushed the Germans back from Moscow, marking the first major defeat of the Nazi war machine. This turning point shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility and set the stage for a relentless Soviet advance that would eventually lead to the fall of Berlin. The Battle of Stalingrad, fought from August 1942 to February 1943, was one of the most brutal and grueling confrontations of World War II. German forces, under the command of General Friedrich Paulus, sought to capture the strategic city on the Volga River, aiming to secure vital oil supplies and cripple the Soviet war effort. However, the Soviet defense, led by General Vasily Chuikov, turned the city into a hellish battleground with relentless urban combat, house-to-house fighting, and heavy civilian casualties. As the winter set in, the Germans found themselves trapped in a deadly encirclement. The Soviet counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, encircled the Axis forces, cutting off their supply lines and forcing them into a desperate situation. The harsh winter conditions, combined with a lack of food and ammunition, led to the collapse of German morale. By February 1943, after months of intense fighting and staggering losses on both sides, the German Sixth Army surrendered. This decisive Soviet victory marked the turning point in the war on the Eastern Front, initiating a long and costly retreat for Nazi forces that would eventually lead to their defeat. On June 6, 1944, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, commonly known as D-Day, a monumental invasion that opened a second front in Europe during World War II. Over 156,000 Allied troops from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada stormed the beaches of Normandy, France, facing heavy resistance from entrenched German forces. The invasion, which involved a combination of airborne assaults and amphibious landings, marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe from Nazi occupation. Despite formidable obstacles, rough seas, fortified German defenses, and constant counterattacks, the Allies secured beachheads at Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword Beaches. In the days following the landings, Allied forces expanded their foothold, linking up with airborne divisions and pushing inland. The success of D-Day was a critical blow to Nazi control over Western Europe, setting the stage for the liberation of France and the eventual advance into Germany. The invasion also diverted German forces from the Eastern Front, where the Soviet Union was pushing the Nazis back, further stretching Hitler's resources. D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi rule in Europe. 6. As World War II neared its end, the Allied forces intensified their campaign against Japan, using strategic bombing to cripple the nation's war infrastructure and morale. Cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Hiroshima were targeted in devastating air raids, aiming to weaken Japan's capacity to fight and force a surrender. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945 caused immense destruction, leaving over 100,000 civilians dead, and further compounded Japan's desperate situation. However, the Japanese remained resolute, unwilling to surrender. In the Pacific, the Battle of Okinawa, fought from April to June 1945, proved to be one of the war's bloodiest conflicts. The island of Okinawa was seen as a crucial stepping stone for the Allies to launch an invasion of Japan's home islands. The Japanese, aware of the impending threat, fought fiercely, utilizing kamikaze attacks and entrenched defensive positions, resulting in a staggering loss of life on both sides. With over 200,000 casualties, including tens of thousands of civilians, the Battle of Okinawa highlighted the immense cost of a potential invasion of Japan. It reinforced the decision to use atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hastening the end of the war and Japan's eventual surrender in August 1945. 7. As World War II neared its conclusion, Allied leaders faced the daunting prospect of a full-scale invasion of Japan, which promised to result in immense casualties on both sides. In response, A secretive effort known as the Manhattan Project was launched in 1942, aimed at developing an atomic bomb that could bring a swift end to the war. The project brought together some of the brightest minds in physics, including J. Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and Leo Szilard, working in isolated laboratories across the United States. After years of intense research and experimentation, the first successful test of an atomic bomb, codenamed Trinity, took place on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert. The explosion marked the dawn of a new era in warfare, showcasing the destructive power of nuclear energy. With Japan's refusal to surrender, the United States, under President Harry S. Truman, decided to use the atomic bomb as a means to force Japan's capitulation. On August 6, 1945, the bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima, followed by Fat Man on Nagasaki on August 9th. The unprecedented devastation led to Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, officially ending World War II. The bombings, however, also raised profound ethical and moral questions about the use of nuclear weapons, marking a pivotal moment in history.